You've heard me talk a lot over the course of the last couple of weeks. I've been on television a couple of times saying, oh, there's no bricks and mortar, there's no bricks and mortar, and there's no bricks and mortar for a wall in this. We can build this, okay? And we're going to build this. There are several hundreds of millions of dollars for us to replace cyclone fencing with 20-foot high steel wall. There's several hundreds of millions of dollars in the bill for us. Can we bring up the other photo, please? If we have the other photo. There's several hundreds of millions of dollars for us to build levee walls along the southern border. And as many of you know who follow this issue, some of the most vulnerable areas that we have are places along rivers where we desperately need levees in order to provide the protection of the southern border that we need. Okay? We are building this now. There is money in this deal to build several hundreds of millions of dollars of this to replace this. That's what we got in this deal, and that's what the Democrats don't want you to know. This stuff is going up now. Why? Because the president wants to make the country more safe. This doesn't stop drugs and doesn't stop criminals from crossing the border. In fact, it doesn't stop hardly anything from crossing the border. This does. And that's what we got in this deal, and that's why we're so excited about the opportunities that we have to follow through on the president's promises to secure the southern border. So unless we have the other picture, I'll take a couple questions.
How do you say that fence will keep drugs from coming over the border? They tunnel underneath the border 75
This is the border,
feet.
the general left. This is the wall, by the way, that DHS said they want. I've sat in the Oval Office of the president. We've talked about bricks and mortar. We've talked about concrete walls. This is what DHS wants. Why? Because it actually works better. You can tunnel under anything. I will answer your question, okay? You can see through this one, okay? It's actually safer. Where we have this in place now, and we do, it's actually safer for our Border Patrol agents. You can talk to the DHS about the details, but there's been a dramatic reduction in attacks on our Border Patrol agents where they can see through the wall because nobody's throwing anything over the top at them. This is what DHS wanted. It's also half of the cost, so we can build twice as much of it. This is a huge win for border security.
It looks like you have a wall there already.
This is the stuff that is actually built already. So this is an example. That was the picture I was looking for. If anybody's watching this, is the picture of the levee wall. This is what it looks like when it's currently built. And that was, we don't have the other picture up there anymore, of the cyclone fencing. This will be replacing cyclone fencing. There's other pictures we have.
Do you need a wall in all these places where you have existing fencing like this? Is that a good way to spend the government's money?
I think securing the border is a good way to do it. There's certain places where technology will also help. We've got money for that in this. There's places where we can start land acquisition now, for example, for next year. We can do that in this bill. We can start ramping up to hire new border agents. We got additional beds, by the way, at detention centers so that we can effectively end catch and release. One of the difficulties we had on catch and release was that the beds were full of the detention centers. So we've added those beds. So when you look at it holistically, it's a tremendous improvement in border security.
There'll be a wall across the entire U.S.-Mexico border.
As part of this bill, no. You've got a couple $100 million to do it. This is a several-year process. You could not build all of that in 1 year. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Director. Yesterday, of this bill, you said, quote, "I think it's great that the Democrats like the bill. We think it's a great deal for the administration as well."
Yeah.
So what changed? Yesterday it was great that they were pleased with it, and today it's an outrage, it's spiking the football. I mean, what changed?
Well, what I said yesterday is what you ordinarily say when you walk out of a negotiation, which is, we got some of what we want, they got some of what we want. We're either equally happy or equally unhappy, or we're a little bit more happy than they are because we got a bigger portion of government, and they're walking around trying to make it look like they pulled one over fast on the president. I just won't stand for it because it's not true. Yes, ma'am. I'd rather they be truthful. Go ahead.
You were saying earlier that that the Obamacare subsidies are not part of this bill. So
Correct.
Does that mean that this administration is going to stop paying those?
We've not made any decision. I think I've said that to you folks before. We've not made any decision. The payments are due, I believe, the 20th or the 21st of every single month. We've not made any decisions at all on May. Yes, sir.
The follow-up to the earlier question is, what do you say to the members of your own party who say that this particular negotiation didn't net what they wanted? Some of them, I mean, Mike Huckabee, I think, even tweeted something out earlier. They're not happy with it. So what's your response?
Well, keep in mind that until right now, I don't think anybody knew about this. Because what you heard us say is no bricks and mortar, no bricks and mortar is all about technology.
About the deal itself, about
again, I'd be happy to have this discussion with everybody and convince anybody on the right that this was a great deal. I
Well,
talked
what about
with.
those on the right who are not happy with it. They've obviously seen it.
My guess is they have not. My guess is they've been reading the Washington Post, they've been watching television, and heard the Democrat side of the story, and I'm here today to let the other side in the middle. Yes, ma'am.
The president today in the tweet talked about a potential shutdown. You say Democrats wanted to do what they did so that they could force a shutdown. We've heard the term shutdown a lot here.
Yeah.
I think there's probably some folks at home who are saying, my gosh, we're barely 100 days into this. What does that mean for tax reform? What does that mean for an infrastructure bill? What does that mean for a government spending bill in September? And this is just year one. What does it say to the tone that we're already talking about?
I think the tone is that they have a president who can run the place, which is not a narrative that you hear coming out of many different sources right now. You have a president who is able to work with Democrats and Republicans. Again, a little disappointed at the way the Democrats have acted after the deal was put together. But you've got a president who knows what he's doing when it comes to running the country. There were a lot of people who were absolutely convinced, including when he hired me to be the OMB director, that we were going to have a government shutdown. And I think the message that we're sending is that we are competent, we know what we're doing, and the country is safe in our hands, and we think this goes to prove that. Yes, sir.
What just occurred, that you said the negotiations that just
Mr. Chair, I want to follow up on that, on Don's question. I'm a little confused. You said that the Democrats wanted a shutdown.
Yeah, I really believe
And
that.
it's the president himself that tweeted, our country needs a good shutdown in September. Can you explain that? And if there is a shutdown in September, won't it clearly be the president's fault? I mean, he's the one actually calling for
Again,
it.
the 18 budget comes up in September. Between now and then, you've got tax reform to deal with, you hope to have infrastructure to deal with, you have the debt ceiling to deal with. So there's a lot of things to deal with between now and September. And again, what I think you heard the president expressed this morning was frustration over how he's been treated as part of the negotiation. And it may be, if things don't get better, that we get to that point. But I think there's a lot of things that will happen between now and then to let us know if we're moving in the right direction. To your first point about the Democrats, I think it was a little bit reported that there was a great deal of disagreement within the House Democrats over this deal. That Mrs. Pelosi was absolutely convinced when we said that we wanted money for the wall that we would shut the government down. And when we took that request off of the table early in these negotiations, they were flabbergasted. And they were stuck in a circumstance where they were facing possibly shutting the government down, and some of them wanted to do that. My guess is their base is not going to be very happy to know that we are building this. Okay, we are taking their taxpayer money to build this. Right, that's the deal that we cut, and my guess is that's not going to sell very well with some folks on the left, but they're going to have to deal with that. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, you spoke about this being a bipartisan bill because it needs to be. The president seems to also be floating this idea of doing away with the legislative filibuster. Is that a good idea? I mean, is that something you're actually talking about, and is that what you need to?
Well, clearly we don't need it because we did this. The question is, would it be easier? Would the results be even better? Would there be less sort of animosity? Maybe. I know that there has been some discussion on the Hill over the course of the last couple of years for limiting the filibuster when it comes to appropriations bills. Keep in mind, one of the reasons we're here, and one of the reasons we have a discussion, it seems, every couple of months now about a shutdown, is the appropriations process is broken. And the way it used to work, and it's supposed to work, if the House passing an appropriations bill on a topic, say military construction and VA, the Senate passing a bill on the same thing, then going to conference committee, then putting that bill on the desk for the president, that I don't think has functioned in the last decade. I've been here since 2011, and it's never worked. We want to go back to that process, but the reason we can't get back to that process is because the Senate is requiring 60 votes on every single appropriations bill, and that is forcing this discussion about continuing resolutions, which are a bad way to run the government, and they force a discussion about shutdowns, which are simply not productive.
What does the president say, Director Mulvaney, thanks for being here today. What does the president, how does the president define a good shutdown?
I don't know. We haven't had one. I think a good shutdown, if there is such a thing, again, a shutdown is not, and I've said this before to you folks, I said it during my confirmation, it's not a goal, okay? And it's not a negotiating tool.
The president advocated
But to the extent the president advocated for one today, if you wanted to imagine what a good shutdown was, it would be one that fixes this town.
So what would the
That one that
president
drives
say?
the message back home to people that it really was as broken as they thought that it was when they voted for Donald Trump, and they would trust him if that's what it's necessary to do to fix Washington, D.C., that would be a good shutdown. Yes.
Just to be clear, in the last shutdown, 800,000 federal employees were indefinitely furloughed. Another 1.3 million were required to work without knowing when they would get paid.
Right.
So is that a good shutdown that fixes
So
Washington?
back to your point, you and I have had these discussions before because I've been through a shutdown before. Every single one of those folks got paid. right? Everybody always has. During the temporary lapses in appropriation, which is what the Congressional Research Service calls them.
those families
It is
that
a lot of
agree.
uncertainty, and it's certain, and that's why I say it's not desirable. But you asked me what a good one would look like, and a good one would be something that fixes Washington, D.C. permanently. Yes, sir.
Mr. Director, you said in your statement before you started taking questions that the president delivered on his promises and got his priorities funded.
Yeah.
Well, that's not true. You didn't get the border wall, no funding for the border wall. That's a replacement, no funding for a new wall along the U.S. southern border. Planned Parenthood.
Let me ask you a question.
Let me
no,
finish.
I'll let you finish, but let me ask you a question. You're asking a series of questions. I'll stop right there. When you heard about the deal yesterday, I'll be happy to let you go if you let me answer your question. I won't jump to another person. I promise. You've seen me do this a couple times before. You said,
My
well,
question, then you
no,
can
but-
take it as a whole, right?
Fine, go
Okay,
ahead.
thank you very much. So
Are they always like this, Sean?
as far as the priorities that you say are funded, the border wall, no new border wall along the U.S. southern border. Planned Parenthood was not defunded. You've already said that another priority of the president was not carried through, and that's the sanctuary cities problem. So explain to me how you say what you said before and square what you said before with the actual reality as far as the budget is concerned.
Sure, and I'll
Thank
say
you.
it. Thank you. Thank you for finishing your question. Let me ask you a question. Okay, when you heard in the last 48 hours about the deal, did you think we could build this? I bet you didn't. Nobody did. Okay, is it a replacement for existing wall? Yeah, that's fine. Is it new wall? No. This is what's out there right now. Okay, and this is what's going to be put in as a result of this bill. Okay, that is better border security. You can call it new wall, you can call it replacement, you can call it maintenance, call it whatever you want to. The president's priority was to secure the southern border, and that's what this does. No, he asked a couple questions. I'm going to the young woman in the pink then, and then the young woman in the orange, and then we'll take another couple. But let me finish your thing. Just Planned Parenthood, okay? Planned Parenthood. We had a good discussion, but it's a fair question. We had a really good discussion about that. Okay, and what we decided after talking to some of our most pro-life supporters on the Hill and the pro-life supporters outside was that this president's already made his case fairly strongly for his pro-life position. You saw us sign the CRA. You saw Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, have to break the tie on that vote. Okay, on Planned Parenthood, on the states with the Medicaid funding. You've seen the executive orders. You've seen the stuff. Oh, this bill includes all of the traditional protections for the pro-life movement, including the Hyde Amendment. And what we simply decided was, look, if you want to take a vote on the Hill to stake out your position on Planned Parenthood, do it on the health care bill. And the outside groups agreed with us on that. The pro-life movement agreed with that. If you want to prove to the folks back home that you are pro-life, then vote for the Planned Parenthood bill. The last thing you asked about sanctuary cities, I already talked about that, and that was something we gave up in the negotiation. But the end of the day, here's how I look you in the face, and the folks on the camera and the folks back home and say the president got his priorities funded. More money for the military, more money for the southern border security, and more money for school choice. Those are the same exact priorities that I talked about in March when we laid out the budget. So that's how I could look you in the eye and tell you that I'm absolutely satisfied we funded our priorities. Now,
Look like that border wall right there, the new border wall that you built. Will it look like that one right
well,
there?
this is what's permitted in the bill. So that would
So
take
I'm
this-
saying, will the new one that's built along the U.S. southern border look like that border wall right there?
Well, I mean, we've got a border that's, in certain places, yes. I mean, the other photo we can't get up is the levees, so I'm not really sure what your question is. We will build the
You have
most
to replace
appropriate.
that wall with a new wall with new funding. In other words, it's just a short-term fix, and then we're going to
That is a
the U.S.
20-foot
government.
high steel wall. That is not a temporary short-term fix. So I'll
He's
finish you.
asking
No,
if
I'll go
you're
to. I've been
building-
promising the young lady in the pink in the back a question for a second.
And
the young lady in the
I'll
orange.
follow up
Okay.
on that. Where is that being built, and how many miles are you going to get out of it?
Oh, I don't know where it's being built. And again, we haven't done the per mile. I think the total spending is $347 million on that, but we haven't done the math yet on what that does.
Cover, what are we talking about?
Well, again, it depends on. It's more expensive to build a wall in certain places. So this is going to be replacement. So we have to go out and figure out where we are. And it's cheaper than building new wall because we already have land acquisition here. We have the rights to build it, et cetera. There's probably roads out there to service it. When you're building new wall, to the gentleman's point, you're starting from scratch, so you have to build the infrastructure necessary just to get the construction teams out there to build. So we haven't done the math yet on how many miles we can build and where it will be. What we do know is that we have several hundreds of millions of dollars to do this. Do you have a follow-up on that or not?
Well, yes. I mean, when can we see construction? When do you think you're going to go out there and put up a wall?
This construction that you see here, well, I don't know if it's this exact construction because I don't know where this photograph is. This wall is being installed on the southern border today. Yes, ma'am.
back on the issue of shutdowns, you mentioned earlier that President Trump was upset by how the Democrats portrayed the deal.
Yeah.
Is it right to shut down the government because of how something was portrayed instead of what was actually
Which is why
in
we're
the
not
deal?
shutting it. If that was the case, we'd be vetoing this bill now.
Isn't that what he's foreshadowing?
No, I think what he's foreshadowing is, look, this place has to change. The way we run the town has to be fixed. We have to do something. We cannot simply muddle along using the same models that the previous administration has used. Okay, this is a change agent president, and he's going to change Washington, D.C., and if it takes a shutdown, then that's what it takes. But again, that's several months away from that discussion. We have a lot to do between now and then. Yes, sir.
Quick follow-up on this notion of a good shutdown. Wouldn't most Americans agree that shutdowns are bad? You shouldn't shut down the government? And further to that point, it seems as if you may have answered your own question this week on the question of government shutdown. You have a compromise. Republicans and Democrats are getting together and passing something. Both sides are not getting everything that they want. Isn't that what the American people want? They want their government to work and pass budgets that can be a compromise and both sides can agree on. How can a shutdown be good?
That's exactly what I think they want, and that's exactly what we have given to them with this agreement. My point to you in response to a couple different questions was that the president wants to see Washington better, get fixed, change the way it does business.
This week that you had a compromise?
It is. It absolutely is, which is why it's so frustrating. Which is why it's so frustrating to have the Democrats go out and say they won and we lost. That's not a bipartisan way to approach things. I can't imagine Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill having that discussion, at the end of a negotiation.
Both sides always do.
You actually, last question. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to ask you about Republicans. I know that you're talking about on the Senate side you need Democrats and stuff, but on the House side, there have been budget bills that simply can't get enough Republican support to pass on their own. Do you think that it is possible to do a Republican budget bill with Republican votes alone?
I do, because I voted for him myself. There's actually been a lot more,
Like an actual appropriations
many more
bill?
appropriations bills that have passed with just Republican support than people realize. The reason you don't hear about them is that they die, because the Senate is incapable of passing a bill or passing a bill that has any chance of passing in the House because they have to use the 60-vote threshold, which is where I started the conversation. So no, I think you're selling the Republicans short. You're selling Republicans leadership and the rank and file membership. You let them speak their mind. Let them let their voices be heard in the next appropriations process, which, by the way, starts today. And I'll close with this. This puts 17 to an end, okay? But the discussion about the 18 funding begins right now, and we very much want to see the ordinary appropriations process function. And anything we can do at the White House to encourage that to happen, we will do it. Because we do not want to be here again. We don't want to be having a discussion about a shutdown. Look, one of the things you asked about changing Washington, about why would you have a discussion of shutdown in September? If the appropriations process is still not working by September, that's a bad thing for the country. It's a bad thing for the Congress, by the way. One of the things that we like, okay, as members of the government, I'm not talking about members of the administration now, as members of the government, is that the proper functioning of the appropriations process is critical to the proper constitutional function of the government. The House and the Senate are supposed to use the power of the purse, and when they don't do appropriations bills, their constituents' voices, who are also our constituents' voices, are not heard. So we hope very much that comes back as part of the process. We're very pleased with the deal today. If you have any follow-up questions, you can always call Mr. Zartaki. Thank you very much again, and thank you for letting me have a shout-out to my wife.
Will you guys just email where that wall is from exactly so we can identify location? Appreciate it.
Sean,
Thanks so much.
Sean, please.
Hey, Sean.